All right, welcome in. This is Coach Mark Gottfried. Welcome to the Front Row Podcast. And I kind of usually start off every episode talking about how excited I am to have the guests that I've had. And this has just been an amazing project. But today, I'm really excited because I have been encouraged over and over by a number of people to invite this guest on my show. And today I have the most amazing young person who actually is my daughter. So this is Mary Layson Gottfried. And Mary Layson, welcome in.
Thanks for having me.
This is going to be a lot of fun. And so Mary Layson and I, obviously we talk all the time. We're very close. And just to give everybody a little bit of a heads up, an intro into Mary Layson. Mary Layson is a graduate of NC State University. She is a newlywed to her wonderful husband, Landerson Braga. And Mary Layson currently has a career in modeling. And she has grown up around sports, you know, obviously with my background as a basketball coach. So I'm really excited, Mary Layson, because obviously I'm very proud of you. And you know that, you know how much I love you. But let's talk a little bit about the whole modeling kind of career. It's something that you do now. You're having a lot of success in it. And, you know, a lot of times I think people see models and they see the glamorous side of modeling and they see the pretty pictures and the pretty locations and all the things that you get to do. But there's a lot more to it than that. And it's a little bit more of a grind maybe than people realize. So explain a little bit how you got started, how you got going into the modeling career.
Yeah, for sure. You know, when I was younger, modeling was always something that, you know, I looked for. I kind of wanted to do modeling. It wasn't something, you know, that was an extreme goal of mine when I was growing up. Obviously, I played a lot of sports, and so I love playing sports. But when I was 16, I was in New York City on a class field trip, and I was scouted by an agency. I was at a Starbucks with my mom, and this lady kept staring at me, and you know, at the time, I remember telling my mom, you know, why does this lady keep staring at me? And eventually, she came over. She introduced herself, and through the process, she took me to a few agencies, and an agency at that time, they wanted to sign me. But, you know, I was 16. I hadn't graduated high school yet. So obviously for you and Mom, that was not an option. That wasn't going to happen. So I ended up finishing high school. And actually, when I was a senior in high school, I had submitted myself to some agencies, which basically that just means you take simple photos of yourself. You can send them to agencies. And if an agency is interested, they reach back out to you and you kind of get the ball rolling from there. And so Wilhelmina in Miami at the time, they were interested in signing me, having me move down to Miami. But again, you know, that was kind of, you know, not really on the table for me. You know, you guys really wanted me to go to college, thought that was really important. And so, you know, I kind of put that aside and went to college, majored in fashion and textile management, got my degree with a concentration in brand management and marketing. And at that time when I graduated, my plan was to move to New York and do something in fashion, but I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do. I was kind of a little bit all over the place with applying for different positions here and there, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And around that time, there was an agency again in Miami that was interested in me, that I had gotten connected through an agency that was in North Carolina, and they offered me a contract, wanted me to move down to Miami. And so I was like, all right, you know, why not? I don't currently have a job. I'm coming right out of college, and, you know, let me give this a try. It's been something that I've wanted to do. You know, let's see what I can do with this. So I moved down to Miami in, I think that was September of 2015, and started my modeling career. And here I am almost 9 years later, still blessed to be able to be doing it full time.
So as you mentioned, Mary Layson, you know, when you were in high school and, you know, as a father, you know, I'm your father, and, you know, you're nervous, you know, you want to make sure your kids are all, you know, in the best place possible. But, you know, looking back, I mean, it's flattering that people wanted you to maybe start your career then. But looking back now, I mean, obviously, hopefully you understand where dad and mom are a little bit protective, but maybe somebody else out there who's really young like that, maybe it would, do you think that was the right move for you? Or do you think, hey, if I'd have started earlier, how do you feel about that now as you look back now that you're a little bit older now?
Look, I think that the modeling industry has changed a lot. If 20 years ago, somebody needed to start much younger. If you started modeling when you were 22 years old, like I was, you would have been considered old. If you think about during that time, there wasn't models of all different age ranges and, other things, different sizes and shapes and everything like there are now. The industry was much different. So when I got into it, I think that for my age, it ended up being fine because at that time, the industry was changing a lot and clients and the industry just as a whole, they weren't so set on the fact that you started modeling at 13 years old. Mm-hmm. When I look back at it in hindsight, obviously hindsight's 2020. I'm glad that I started when I was 22 later. I have a lot of friends that started modeling when they were 13, 14 years old. They left Brazil or they left Russia or they left wherever they were from. They went to travel and, like now I look at that, I'm like, that's such a baby, you're sending such like a bait that's so little to be off in another country by yourself, which, there could be pros to that, in your career. For me, I don't feel like I missed out on anything. I'm grateful that I have a degree. Maybe I will use it one day, maybe not. But I think that, more than just the study itself, I think I gained a lot just from maturing. And, when I started at 22, I feel like I wasn't so much of a child as, a lot of people, a lot of the girls that I know now that started when they were much younger.
I look back and we were living in a little town on the Gulf Coast called Orange Beach, Alabama, right beside Gulf Shores, Alabama, right there, on the water there for a couple years. And talk a little bit about this too, because when I remember back, and obviously your memory, it was your life, not mine, so you're going to have much more detailed memory, but I always felt as a dad, I was always worried about the pressures that you might feel, as a model, especially as a young person. You've always been, tall, very, very slender. Your diet is amazing, the way you've always eaten. Your mother just did a great job of teaching you and your brothers, nutritional things, and you got a great diet. So I don't know that you've ever been considered overweight ever, but you've always had that kind of physique. But there are some pressures all of a sudden that kind of settle in real quick. And I can remember a time when there was an agency, I think that was really wanting you to just even drop more weight. Yeah. And, as a parent, as your father, I'm like, well, hold on now, man. And is that healthy or not? So maybe those pressures that you felt, at a young age, you were in high school at the time. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that's part of it that a lot of people don't realize, that side maybe of the modeling industry.
Well, again, like I said, a lot of things have changed within the industry. And I think years ago, a lot of times agencies, they really went by, you have to be this weight if you're this height, rather than what is your body type like? What is your bone density like? Sometimes people have different body types and I may look more slender than somebody else, but I might, weigh more just because of the way that my body is, my muscle mass, etc. So yeah, there was definitely a time when I was 17, about to graduate high school, and the agency that I had signed with in Miami at the time, they wanted me to lose about 15 pounds, which I have been slim my whole life. And so I'm sure that as a parent, you're looking at your 17-year-old, eating crackers, and eating nothing, trying to chase after this dream. Like, wait a minute, this is not right. And I think too, also like the fact that I started later, I was able also to kind of find myself and know that, look, there is an agency, there is a time, there is a place for me to be a model. Maybe it's not with this agency that wants to make, have this requirement of me. I experienced other things like that in my career when I was in Germany. I kind of feel like they were a little bit behind the progress that in the U.S. they had made towards kind of accepting more body types and things. but I actually had gotten fired from a job. I got let go from a job. I was booked on a 2-day job in Berlin. I was in Hamburg, living in Hamburg at the time. And I had done a half-day shoot. And right after lunch, came back to shoot. And the client told me that I was released and that I could go home. My agency told me later I had gone back to Hamburg. I was devastated. It was, completely embarrassing. I'm thinking to myself, like, what is wrong with me? Like, and I end up finding out that they said that I was way too big, which is so crazy to me now. And I don't think that stuff would fly anymore these days, but, that was 8 years ago. But, I think a lot of things have changed in the industry. There's a lot more acceptance of different body types and styles, even within just, slender models. There's still a wide range of acceptance. Obviously, now we have a lot of plus size models, and there's no real requirement that you have to be a certain height or a certain weight or anything these days. They look for more just individual beauty rather than, you have to fit into this box of being this specific size. So, for that, I am grateful also.
Yeah. Your mom and I, we always, we wanted to encourage, all of their children. We have 5 children. You're one of 5 and you have 4 brothers. We're going to talk about that a little later, growing up in that. But in that time period, I can remember in that you want to encourage your children to chase whatever dreams that they have and the opportunities that may come towards them, which you had some great opportunities. But on the other hand, you're careful as a parent because you don't, what we didn't want is for our child, any one of our child, to chase something that potentially could harm you. In other words, all of a sudden one day you're just eating celery and that's, you're just eating celery and lettuce all day long and you're never going to eat anything else. And that was the fear. Like we want you to achieve and we want you to try and go for it and do things, but to do it in the right way. And you brought up a great story. And from my vantage point, my memory is probably a little different, but I remember you calling me. I want to say, if I have this right, I want to say that you were either on a train back to wherever. I
accidentally took the wrong train, so I ended up being, because I was just so distraught trying to get to the train station, get back on my train, and so I ended up being on a train that was like 6 hours long or something. I can't really remember. It just was, I was in this like one train car with like a whole Indian family. It was in, and I wanted to cry in there and, but yeah, I was in Berlin and I had to go back to Hamburg and I went into the agency and they told me you will never work at this size. And shortly after that, I ended up going back to the States and, Germany has been a good market for me. They aesthetically like, the blonde, I'm tall, all of those things are great for the German market. And I have gone back and worked well in Germany, after that. But yeah, definitely don't think that having an unhealthy lifestyle, in order to pursue your dreams. And, I'm, at least for me, at least the way I look at it is that I've just been blessed with a really high metabolism. So, for me, I think ever since I was born, I've been slim,
Well, you do a great job too, and with your eating habits, and you study everything, and so you're remarkable in that regard. But I do remember that day. I remember the phone call, and I remember you saying to me, "Dad, they said I was too fat," and you used those words. And I can remember, and I'm not trying to embarrass you at all because you've never been, you've always been tall and slender, and you've had this. The look you have now is kind of the way you grew up. But I kind of remember saying something of the lines, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but, if you're going to stay in this industry, this is what you want to do and you want to pursue this industry, you are going to have to develop some thick skin. Oh, yeah. And sometimes it's just a preference. It's, hey, I'm choosing a brunette instead of a blonde, or I'm choosing this instead of that. And a lot of times it's not a lot of, you are who you are. But do you think if you look back maybe on that experience, because you've had this amazing successful run as a model, through the last probably 8 or 10 years now of your life, but maybe would you point to that potentially as a turning point as far as say, okay, look, I mean, you've always kind of been tough-minded. Again, you grew up with 4 brothers. You're the daughter of a basketball coach. So, I was always trying to harp on all of you to be tough and mentally tough and, fight through. But would that have kind of been a pivotal point where you said, okay, all right, I'm not going to let those things resonate and affect my soul. Like, it's just not going to, I'm going to overcome that?
Oh, maybe? For sure. I think that, I could have taken that and been like, oh, boohoo me, I'm too big and now let me go do a different career. But I think for me, it was like, I'm not going to let this one client determine, the success that I want to have in my life in this industry. And I've gone on to, in the way that I view it, to have a very successful modeling career. I've been able to do it full time for, the past 9 years. And I definitely think it was a pivotal moment. It always kind of sits in the back of my head because, I had somebody tell me that you'll never work. And I was, basically the same size as I am now. And, to have somebody tell me you're never going to work, you're never going to be successful, you're way too big at this size. Who are you to say that? Right. And, so I do think that it really kind of gave me some fuel to push ahead, and it definitely helped me develop thick skin. And you have to have that in this industry because there's so much rejection. It's constant rejection. You're constantly, and rejection maybe isn't quite the right word, but the same with, actors and maybe other people in entertainment. You have auditions, you have castings, and you're constantly doing castings. And for maybe every 10 casting you get, maybe you get 1 or 2 jobs. And, early on in my career, I think I took it a lot more personal. I'm ugly, they don't like me, or, something, you kind of get into yourself a little bit. But then you start to learn a client is looking for something very specific at that moment. And, that depends on what they've shot in previous campaigns. It's what, they feel like their clientele is attracted to. And so it's nothing personal about a specific model. It's just what they have a vision for at that time. And so when I learned that early on in my career, it kind of gave me the ability to push through. And I wouldn't get defeated when I wouldn't get a job that I wanted. So yeah, I think that really kind of propelled me forward.
When I look back over this last probably decade, with you and how you've been able to advance, I'm, as a father, I'm extremely proud, of, you stand on principles in just about every category, with your faith, some of the social things that are going on in the world. And there's so many things like that you have these amazing principles. But I look at it from a father and say, okay, the modeling industry has taught my daughter how to be tough. You better be tough. It's like you mentioned, if you're thin-skinned and, if you're going to go boo-hoo and cry every night that you don't get a job, you're just probably not going to last very long. You've been able to travel the world. I love the fact that modeling has given you an opportunity to go places and you're not afraid to go try. Wherever that may be. And so modeling has given you this amazing kind of journey where you've also gotten to see the world, which I'm sure, there's a lot of young people that haven't been able to do and to visit and go to and work in some of the places that you've worked in throughout your career.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think when people ask me what my favorite part of modeling is, it's almost always the answer is traveling. It's given me an opportunity to see the world. I love that aspect of it. I love being able to work with different people every day. It's different. Like for people who don't know, every day that I show up on set, unless it's a regular client of mine that I know the team, and it's a completely different crew of people that sometimes I've never met before. So it's an opportunity to get to know new people, and people are from all over the world. They're from everywhere. And it's cool to get different perspectives of people and where they come from and their culture and their lifestyle and their language. But I think traveling is so important. I think that when you travel a lot, especially as a young person, you understand people better. I would encourage people to travel, especially when they're young. It gets harder when you get older. You're not I think as willing to just get on a plane and go somewhere by yourself, for 3 days like I was when I was younger. But I think that you understand people better. When I lived in China, for example, it's a completely different place than the United States. Sometimes people ask me, explain, what do you mean? It's hard to explain because it is so different. The people are so different. The culture is so different, the food, the everything. And so I think that when you have those experiences, then when you come back, you're like, this is why certain people are this way. It's because of the cultural differences. And, I think that can kind of just, it opens up your mind. It makes it easier for you to understand people. And I think that that's a quality that everybody around the world could use more of. Is understanding people better. So
of the places, and you've traveled so much, and for the person who might be just listening or watching the podcast, and I'm a proud dad. I can reel it all. I can brag on you all the time. But kind of walk through some of those places, like some of the countries, and some of the experiences that you may have had along the way that maybe stand out, or some of those places that you've been to, because there's a lot of young people who sometimes they're afraid to take it. They're afraid to take a chance and go, or they're afraid to travel. It sounds great, but they're nervous about it. And maybe you were early on, but some of those stops along the way for you that have just been really cool, and maybe some of the places you've been.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was nervous at all when I went to Miami. I think I was ready to kind of get out on my own, go experience the world. I obviously was grateful and, blessed enough growing up to experience a lot of travel through your job. We traveled a lot in the United States. Mm-hmm. So I think that kind of prepared me not to be afraid to travel. But when I had first moved to Miami, that was the first place that I went after graduating from college. And I was in Miami for about 6 months. Had a great time there. That's actually where I met my husband. And then after I left Miami, I went to Greece. I lived in Athens for a couple months. That was amazing. Athens is one of my favorite places. Just the history there is just so cool. I got to travel around in Greece a little bit, which was really neat. And some of the times, like when I went to Greece, I lived in a model apartment where thankfully I didn't live in one that had 12 girls, which some people have had those experiences, but I had one roommate. We lived in about a 300, maybe. It was basically one room, had a little kitchen, 2 beds, and a tiny little bathroom. And we're still friends to this day. It was a really great experience that I got to have in Greece. And I traveled to Germany, got to work all over Germany, which was cool, and lived in China for a few years. I kind of bounced around from Asia back to New York, and then I would go to Europe. So, I kind of was a little bit all over the place, but I loved my travels. I think I learned so much, and I don't know that I really have a favorite place that I went to, because each place I had different experiences in, and I love each of those kind of differently.
So you've had some, you've mentioned those, and I actually, when you were in college, you took a semester in China. I remember coming over there to visit, and then, I was working in the NBA. I got to visit you, and we visited there as well. We had to go to China one time, but it's also got to be pretty cool, like when you show up at a location, whether it's in Mexico or in Spain. You've mm-hmm. worked in Spain, you've worked in Mexico, you've kind of worked in Portugal, you've worked all over. You mentioned China and Germany and Greece, and then we're talking Spain and Portugal and Mexico. But sometimes for you, is it pretty cool? Like, you roll into some place, they've flown you in, the crew is coming in, and they're going to do a shoot. And then all of a sudden you just see this amazing, cool place, because those spots, those locations have been scouted out mm-hmm. Prior to a company using that location. But I know you've had a couple of those where you've said like, wow, this is pretty cool. This is a neat spot, that maybe you would have never visited that place outside of working as a model.
Oh, for sure. I mean, some of the places that I've been able to work at, I would have never had the opportunity to experience the things that I got to experience without being on set. Some of the locations, some of the places themselves, some of the cities. Really cool. I mean, I got to work, I think when I was in Portugal at a castle, they call it a castle that was from the 1500s, just the history. And that was so very cool. And I've, worked in, multi-million-dollar homes in Mallorca, Spain, which was such a cool experience. So there's it's very, very different places, kind of different experiences. But yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about the different places that I've gotten to experience. All over Mexico have been some of my favorite places as well. One thing too, Mary Layson, that I've always been impressed with, and I think most people that meet you and, get to know you well, you're very level-headed, you're very humble, you're very, you've never ever been, the person that, hey, I'm this model, and you've never had that persona about you. But what I also like about it is, and I've got to know, a lot of your friends really, really well, and they're amazing people, but those,
young models from Brazil, from Russia, from all over the world that, again, maybe you would have never forged those relationships if it wasn't for the industry you're in. And what you've learned, and I don't want to speak for you, but you've learned that like there's amazing people all over the world, and you've become, great friends. You've married a young man who we all love more than anything, Landerson Brage's from a small country town and little village in Brazil. But it's just kind of, it's really neat to see these amazing young people who are from all over the world. And you've all kind of come together in that, and you've become probably lifetime friends.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of funny. I most of my friends are Brazilian. Brazilians kind of have this really tight knit bond. Wherever Brazilians go, they find their community. And so when we first moved to LA, we didn't really know anybody. And Landerson had a couple friend that they had met years before in China, and I think in Thailand, they had all worked together, and we just really created this really strong friendship. And then over the course of a few years, our friendship, our friend group kind of grew, but it happens to be all Brazilians except for me and a friend of mine who's Russian, but she's married to a Brazilian. So we're honorary Brazilians, Soon we'll, maybe have dual citizenship, but I love it. I love having friends from different places. Obviously, I have friends from America, of course, too, places, when I grew up in Alabama, some of my very good friends. But I think that it's really great having friends from other countries as well. Like I said before, I think that it just broadens your perspective on people. And I love learning about cultures from different places. And the Brazilian culture is so lively and colorful and fun, and they're so happy all the time, and just like the way that they want to have barbecues and get together with music and friends, like it's such a positive environment. So I definitely feel myself drawn, to hanging out with my Brazilian friends, because I think that, just that lifestyle is it's so fun and enriching to be around.
And I've got to know most of them pretty well, and they're full of life. I mean, their energy level it's amazing, and it just seems like there's this genuine kind of love for one another that I really like. And, you've mentioned your husband, Landerson, and, obviously we've got to know Landerson well. But, at your wedding, you got married in February in a little town on the Pacific coast in Mexico. Landerson's mother came from Brazil, and his aunt came from Brazil. And the two of them didn't speak a ton of English, probably very little, to be very honest. But I think what's also been impressive for all of us that know you well, and obviously you're my daughter, but the fact that you have learned Portuguese, and you're married to a Brazilian who obviously he speaks English along with Portuguese, and he speaks Mandarin, and he speaks some other languages as well. But the fact that you learned Portuguese, I think, to most people is just something that's really cool. Like you did that obviously for him, for his family. You've been to Brazil to meet his family, but just kind of talk about that, because not very many people I know are doing that. They're not learning a foreign language, and you speak pretty fluently Portuguese now, which is pretty cool.
I feel like I still have a lot to learn, but I'm getting there. When Landerson and I first met, I had moved down to Miami, and I always really wanted to learn another language. It was always very fascinating to me, and in America, we don't really learn another language. You kind of learn Spanish, maybe French. People learn it in high school, but really on a conversational level, most people in America don't speak a second language. And so it was really important to me. Like I really wanted to learn another language. I just always thought that was fascinating. And so when I had moved down to Miami, for people who know that spend time in Miami, majority of people don't speak English in Miami. You get into an Uber, most places where you go, people are speaking Spanish. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to learn Spanish. I'm going to pick this up. There's so many people I can practice with here. Every time I get into an Uber, every time I go somewhere, I have somebody to practice with. So I should start learning. So I had Duolingo, and I, would kind of learn here and there different things. And then soon after I then met my now husband, Landerson, obviously he's Brazilian, so they speak Portuguese. And I had started to hang out with a lot of Brazilians. And so, Spanish and Portuguese, they're similar, but they're different. There are some things that are very different. And so as we started to get more serious and the more that I started to hang out with the Brazilians, I was kind of like, all right, maybe I'll learn Portuguese instead. So I kind of switched over, and the more, the more serious that we got in our relationship, the more it was really important for me to learn Portuguese. Like I said, all the Brazilians, they're a very tight-knit community. So a lot of our friends, even when we lived in China, they were all Brazilian. So they would be speaking Portuguese. And I'm that kind of person that I want to be a part of the conversation. I don't want to be sitting over there, not in tune with everything that's going on. So it was important for me to learn. Like I wanted to learn because I wanted to be a part of it. And so when Landerson had then invited me to go to Brazil for the first time in February of 2017, I knew that his family did not speak any English, like literally none at all. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to be able to speak to his mom. I want to be able to speak to his family. Like I want them to be able to get to know me as well. So I need to learn. So I downloaded Duolingo and I was making note cards and I was studying and I was, I'm going to try and learn this. And I get to Brazil and nobody in his family speaks English. I think he has a couple cousins that speak English, but for the most part, he comes from a huge family. He has like 30 first cousins and nobody speaks English. But being immersed there with the little knowledge that I had, the little language that I had, I picked it up so quickly. When you're immersed somewhere and you don't have the option to speak English, your brain is forced to learn. And sometimes Landerson would be there and I'd be like, okay, well, like, how do I say this? And he'd be like, I'm not here. And so I'm like, okay, like, how do I got to figure out, like, how do I say this? How do I get around? And I made it happen. And then over the years, I've, I feel like for me, I'm probably just hard on myself. I feel like I should know more than I do. But recently I've started taking classes again. I take a Zoom class I have a great teacher that's in Sao Paulo and we Zoom. And, I think it's important. I really want our children one day to be able, we really want them to speak Portuguese and English. And, I would love for them to speak other languages. I think for me, when I started traveling and I would go to Europe and I would meet people and majority of people there, they speak whatever their native language is, plus English. It's a given. They all speak English. So they're already ahead with two. And then most of them then learn a third language. And, my husband speaks, I think he speaks 4 languages, speaks Portuguese, English, Spanish, Italian, Mandarin. He speaks 5 languages. Most people in America speak 1 language. And I think that's a disadvantage to us because I think also as the world is becoming more and more of a melting pot within itself, it's important to be able to speak more languages. And so, hopefully I will be fluent. I feel like I'm kind of conversationally proficient now, but, my goal one day is to be fluent.
Well, it's really impressive because, again, I don't know a lot of people that have done what you have done in that regard. And so, and I know that Landerson and his family, his mother, obviously, they appreciate it because that means a lot to them that you've taken the time and you've taken the effort to do that. And so I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to go now to the fact that here you are. You're the only daughter, my only daughter amongst 4 boys. So there's 5 total. And, every family dynamic is a little bit different and, there's no one way better than the other. And, but for you had 2 things, I think, kind of growing up, or a couple things. Your dad is a pretty hard-nosed basketball coach. You got 4 brothers that are trying to beat you up every day growing up. They're trying to be tough on you. And then you had a mother that was pretty tough too. She's pretty firm and pretty tough. So talk about growing up in that kind of a dynamic with all of that and maybe some of the, things you could pull from that maybe have then helped you as you've gotten a little bit older.
Well, first off, I think the boys would probably argue with you on that point that they were the ones beating me up, that they would say, no, she was the one beating us up. Which to a certain point, until they got bigger than me, I definitely was the one that would pound down on them. But I think it's a great thing. I think like I love the fact that I have 4 brothers. When I was younger, I always really wanted a sister. And I know that my mom said that every time that she had, another baby, I have 3 younger brothers that, I always wanted it to be a sister. But actually now, again, hindsight in 2020, I look back and I'm so thankful actually that I had brothers, because my relationship with my mom is so great. Like, we have a really amazing relationship that maybe we would have had, maybe we wouldn't have had if I would have confided in a sister rather than confiding in her in many things. So like for that, I'm very, very grateful. And I think also from the discipline aspect, I think discipline is so important. And I think that it makes you strong, makes you tough, makes you resilient. And, you know, I think that you guys, it was always a healthy discipline. You disciplined with love. And I think that's really important. I think that in my opinion, I think we're missing that in a lot of parenting nowadays. You know, there's obviously, you know, a big difference when it isn't followed by love. But I think that I'm grateful that in our house, at the time I didn't like it. I didn't like, you know, feeling like my parents are so strict. You know, but now I see that there's so many good things that came from that. It really shaped me as a person.
And, you know, for everybody that's listening and watching, Mary Layson's older brother, Brandon, graduated from Stanford. He's now married to a wonderful girl named Catherine, now Gottfried, Catherine Kennedy. We call her Kat. But you kind of have that sister.
Oh, definitely.
Now, you know, you have, you know, it took a while to bring another female in, but now, you know, with her, and I love the fact that you guys have a really good relationship, and, you know, and she didn't have a sister either. Yeah. So here you go, the both of you, you know, she had 2 brothers, you had 4. And now that you guys have that in common, I know that has to be special for you as well.
Oh, it's so special. I love Kat. She's like one of my very, very dear friends. You know, we call each other, before they got married, we called each other our sisters in love. You know, like we just loved each other so much. We do. She's so like very near and dear to my heart. And she is the sister that I didn't have growing up. And for her as well, because she didn't have a sister, I think that the bond that we have is really so special. Yeah. And it will be a lifelong sisterhood that we have together, which I'm so grateful for.
You know, when I look back, Mary Layson, and there's always, there's, you know, obviously every parent has a million memories about different things growing up, but I'm going to bring up a story that, so I'm coaching at Alabama. I was the head coach at Alabama, and we're playing at Mississippi State. And for those people that aren't familiar, it's about an 80-mile bus ride between the 2 schools. It's not a flight. It's just too easy to get there. You hop in a bus and go. And I want to say you had to be somewhere around maybe 10-ish. I don't know if 8 or 10-ish maybe years old. And you came on a road trip with us. And we're playing at Mississippi State. It's a hostile environment. It's loud. It's this massive rivalry between the 2 teams. And, you know, they hate us. We hate them, you know, and the fans are just, you know, there was a rivalry between myself and their head coach. And at Mississippi State, they put chairs right behind our bench. And so you're sitting literally right behind me. And every time there's a timeout, you know, I'd come to the bench, and my players are sitting right there. I could see your face right through. You were leaning in, you know, listening in the huddle. And I'm telling on myself here because I remember getting on the bus. We won the game. It was a big deal. You know, we're all excited, and we're getting ready to come home. And you hopped on the front seat there with me on the bus, and I remember you looked right at me and said, "Daddy, I've never heard you use language like that." So,
oh man, I remember that like vividly in my mind, because we always sat, you know, at the games with, you know, my mom and brothers. We would always sit, you know, 20 rows up or so that we had a great view of the court. So I don't know that I had ever sat that close before. I just remember feeling like my eyeballs were going to pop out of my head. Like, you know, every other word was some word I'd maybe never even heard of coming out of his mouth.
Don't tell on me too bad.
But, you know, it's kind of funny. I think like, you know, Mom was the one I in my memory that was always a little tougher with discipline on us. And sometimes I think I look back on it and I'm like, he got all of that out on his players. He didn't want to come home and do that to his kids. I think he got it all out on them so that, you know, when it was time for you to come home, you'd have gotten all that out.
That was interesting. Another memory that I am so grateful for and thankful for was, you know, your mom and I had gotten through a divorce, and so I was by myself. And your senior year of college at NC State, now I'm the head basketball coach at NC State. And as our team would go travel, a lot of times we would take a charter plane and we'd go play different places around the ACC there when I'm coaching. But I want to say it might have been every trip or maybe all but maybe one. I don't know. You might have missed one. But the opportunity that you and I had where you traveled with the basketball team, you traveled with us. We'd go to the airport, we'd hop on a plane together, we'd go to a game, whether we won the game or lost the game, our hotel room, the whole thing. And it was just such a cool experience for me to have you with me, but then also for you to you always were around coaching and around athletics because I was a coach, but I think it maybe gave you a little different perspective too on kind of what this is all about too, maybe as we went on road trips. And then it was just a great experience for you and I as well.
Oh, it was such a great experience. I will remember that forever. I mean, being a college student, being able to travel with the team, being able to like sit alongside with you and kind of go on that journey with you, was such a great experience. And, my senior year, the team was great and we were winning right and left. And so like that obviously made it all the more fun. But I definitely learned a lot. And I also got to see a side of you that a lot of people don't see. I think, during the losses when it was, very hard on you, I saw you never give up. I would see, you would get the film right onto your iPad as soon as you would get into the bus and you're reviewing and I never saw you ever let it get you down and defeat you. And I think a lot of that, like within college sports, people see what they want to see, and they also see what is kind of given to them. They don't see all the behind the scenes things. So I think just that experience, it was so many lessons that I learned. And I think also just, the relationship that we have that was so special for me to be able to have that experience.
Growing up too, Mary Layson, not to talk too much about, as you're growing up, but you grew up around athletics. It's unavoidable. It's part of who you and your brothers are. But how did you begin to, because, most people don't realize that, here you are at the game. Here's mom with these 4 children, and you're at the game, and the team's playing well, and everybody's on the bandwagon, and everybody thinks Coach Gottfried, he's such a great coach, and oh God, we're cheering, and we love him and love him and love him, and then all of a sudden your team's not playing very well, and all of a sudden that switches, and all of a sudden here are people in the crowd, and they're taking shots, and they're saying negative things about your dad.
Yeah.
And there had to be lessons maybe that you learned in there too, because most people that go, they don't experience that. They don't really know that's like. They go to the game, they cheer for their team, and they go home. But you guys you grew up in it, you grew up around it, and maybe some of those lessons along the way that you had to deal with potentially have affected you as an adult in a positive way, where you see kind of that a little bit and see where people were they can be cruel. Yeah. They can be really cruel at times.
Well, I think the best thing was for me to stay off Twitter. Obviously at that time, Twitter was, it could be very toxic, because people would go on there and they fire Mark Gottfried and, they just talk about a lot of things that they don't understand. And, sometimes even in the crowd, if we're during a game, there's some guy, behind trying to coach. And, it's like, who are you and what are you doing back here, man? Why don't you go down there if it's so easy? And a lot of times, obviously, because of who we were, I had to hold my tongue. I couldn't say the things that maybe I wanted to say because, we represented you. And that was nothing that I feel like you ever told us that we had to do. We just kind of knew, we knew that we had to be an example and lead by example in our attitudes. But I think, like I said, I think that you always persevered. And through all of that, we always saw that you always persevered. And I think that was a great lesson for all of us, me and the boys, to learn, that you're going to always experience hard things in life. And it's kind of like how you deal with the situation. And even when people are coming at you right and left with, whatever it is, you have to figure out how to persevere and get through that and kind of ignore the noise. So I think that was a great, it was a lesson. It was hard. It was definitely very hard at times to hear people talk about you the way that they did. They would love you one day and want you fired the next day. It was a roller coaster. But we knew who you were. We knew the kind of coach that you were. And so I think that it didn't really bother me so much at the end of the day, because it's like, you guys are all buffoons, you don't know what you're talking about. but it's definitely good lessons to learn.
When you guys were younger, it was really one thing that was nice is, I was the head coach at Alabama for 11 years. And so that 11-year period, you guys didn't have to move a ton. A lot of times in coaching, children are moving all the time. And you guys had that long kind of run there in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, growing up. And then, eventually we went to Orange Beach and then eventually to Raleigh, North Carolina. And so you moved, but you didn't have to move sometimes as much as other people did. But here you are now, you live in Los Angeles and, you've lived all over the world, but you have these roots that are kind of formed in the South, these kind of Southern roots. And I get it all the time. People, they'll always ask me, hey, are you from Texas? And I'm like, nope, that's a whole nother country over there in Texas. Alabama's a little different. But that long period that you guys all had in Alabama and the people in Alabama, and then obviously North Carolina as well, and that kind of Southern roots, now here you are in L.A., little different animal. Talk about that in the contrast or maybe the lessons you've learned or how that, because obviously it's different, way different than it was for you when you were little.
Very different. I mean, Alabama, everything about Alabama is different. Couldn't be more different than California. Might as well be in another country, like you said. And it is funny because a lot of people, they always associate a Southern accent to Texas. It's like there is a whole nother part of the South that's over here that you're forgetting about. And it's a very different South. Like I always say it's the South, but it's different. But I love that I'm from the South. I think that there's so many amazing things from the South that the South doesn't get credit for. I think a lot of times people associate the South with negative things, which there were, obviously, but I think that there's so many amazing things. I think I learned that Southern hospitality is a real thing. And I learned that when I left the South, and especially when I moved to New York. And I'm walking down the street living in New York like, hi, how are you? And people are like, why are you talking to me? And so I definitely think that Southern hospitality is real and it's very refreshing. I meet people that go to the South and like, wow, people are so nice. And, your neighbors and people bring you casseroles and, they're just very friendly and it's genuine. The friendliness is very genuine, which I love about the South. I like that, I say that I'm from Alabama, even though I really haven't lived in Alabama now for over, I don't know, what is that, like 12 years now I haven't lived in Alabama, but I still feel like it was my home because that's where I lived most of my childhood. And we had an amazing opportunity living in a neighborhood where we had miles of woods behind our house that we just were able to come home from school and run outside and play outside until it was dark. And I don't think there is a right or wrong way to raise your kids in that sense, but I'm grateful for that because, I'm grateful that I didn't grow up in a city, that I was able to run around and play outside as long as I wanted to. And I think that those are things that have shaped me as a person. And, I can't say that I don't know that I would ever move back to Alabama. But I am grateful that I had the opportunity to grow up there because I think that there's, great food, great people, great music, and I love the South.
A little hot and sticky in the summertime.
Yeah, the humidity I don't miss. I don't miss that.
So you're on the verge here and a newlywed here for a handful of months, and you and your husband both, Landerson, you guys have this amazing career going. You're getting to travel all over the world. You're doing some amazing things, but at some point here, we're all hopeful that, there becomes an opportunity for you to have children. And I know that's something that's important to you and at the right time. But, when you're very intentional as a parent, and I encourage people sometimes, if you just let society kind of tell you how to raise your kids, you're just kind of getting tossed around like the waves in the sea. But if you're very intentional and saying these are the characteristics that I hope that we can instill in our children. And, I've learned as the parent or a parent of 5 kids, you guys are all different. Everybody's different. But I think there are certain things you can have influence over as a parent, the characteristics you want your children to develop. And so if I were to ask you, and I know your husband, Landerson, he would have some ideas on this, but and you've heard me ask this to a number of my guests on the podcast that I've had, but those characteristics, like for you, if you could just gift your children certain characteristics, what would those be?
Well, I'm so blessed to have an amazing husband. I mean, you obviously love him so much. My family loves him. And I think that being married to him and like being with him now for 8 years, like he showed me the importance of having a giving spirit. He is the most giving person I've ever met in my life. He's always wanting to do something for somebody, and he does it with a happy heart. He doesn't even think twice about it. And I think that that is a beautiful quality that he has. And I would love to instill that in our children. I think also leadership. I think when I was young, one of the things that I remember probably the most from being a child was that I always remember you were, it was so strongly instilled in me that, be a leader and not a follower. And I think that when you are somebody who can think for yourself and you can lead people, I think that that's so important. And so I think leadership would be also something that I would want to instill into my kids. I think it's important to know how to think for yourself, to be able to think critically, and not to just blow in the wind and just follow people the way that they go. Every parent I'm sure has always heard, well, so-and-so is doing it, so why can't I do it? And I think that, when you teach your kids to be a leader, don't always follow after everything that, other kids are doing. Make sure that you think through this. I think that that's really important. And yeah, those are probably two things that I would love to give to my kids.
Talk for a quick second here. We're going to close up here in just a minute, but I don't want you to rush. But talk a little bit, because one thing that is impressive to me, obviously, again, you're my daughter, and I love you dearly. But talk a little bit about how important your faith is to you in your daily life, in your professional life, now as a wife. How important that is to you.
Oh, it's everything to me. I think that, the faith that I have in Jesus is so important to my life. It's important to our marriage. Our marriage, we want it to be mirrored after Christ and what Christ did for the church. And I think that, Lenderson and I have been together for 8 years. We've had a lot of ups and downs, like every relationship. But I think where we've been the most solid in our relationship is when both of us really took a turn and we really focused our eyes on Jesus, and where we found, our hope in him. Because this world is always going to hit you with something. There's always going to be something happening, whether it's a pandemic or it's this or it's that, whatever it is in your life, that impacts the world as a whole or just you as an individual. And, for me, having the peace that I have in my faith is so important to me, because sometimes I think, how could I even function if I didn't have that peace that I have in my life that I believe you can only find in Jesus? And I think he gives that to us. And so I think that, for Landerson and I to have that faith within our marriage and to have that structure within our marriage, I believe that we can accomplish anything together. And I'm so grateful for that, because I think that I would not be where I am today. Sometimes in my life, I think our minds are very powerful, and where our minds can lead to, if you let your mind just kind of wander around, you can have anxiety and depression. And it's not to say that if you don't have faith and you don't have God in your life, you're not going to experience those things, but that there's somebody taking care of you, and that there's somebody to lean on when you do go through those things and you don't feel alone. And have that it's life-changing. I can't ever imagine my life now not having him by my side, not having God in my life, because it's really changed me as a person. It's changed my perspective, and it gives me a peace that it's hard to explain, the peace that, passes all understanding. So,
well, let me just say this, and obviously those that know me well, a lot of people that listen and watch, they don't know me that well, but obviously those that know us know that we're very close. I'm so proud of you, Mary Layson. I'm so excited for your future. And, not only was your wedding magnificent, and that's a wonderful thing, but your life and your relationship with Landerson is the most important thing. It's not just the wedding, which was great, but it's the journey that you two are going to have together, and the ups and downs and all the things you're going to experience together. You've already experienced a lot together, but just so proud. I'm just so proud as a dad of who you are as a as a young adult, and can't wait to see all the amazing things that are gonna come in the future. So,
thanks, Dad.
Thank you for coming on the Front Row podcast here, and I've had a lot of them. I've had amazing guests. I've had a lot of amazing people, but there's no doubt today was it's my favorite one I've done yet to this point. So, thank you for being on.
Thanks, Dad.